Usually with most things in medicine, you have to have a genetic predisposition towards that, and then you have to have some environmental insult, typically, or more, to finally trigger it. Males tend to have the worst forms of autism, probably something about testosterone there involved in that. So see, there's another possible strike. But clearly we see autism, and even full-blown autism in females, but did that particular female have a different genetic predisposition? We just simply don't know. I don't think a parent can make their kid autistic. I would never accuse a parent of doing something wrong that made their child look like that. Now, all parents will ask that, especially moms seem to say, now, did I do something wrong in my pregnancy, or this or that happened, or I was in an accident, could that have, I mean, wanting to take the guilt for it, and I really don't, we have no evidence of that, and certainly not environmentally from the parenting angle. Within the confines of the autistic spectrum, which is what the general public usually calls it, or the PDD, or pervasive developmental disorders, there's some typical features that we see. Some kids have all, some have few, but there are common features. The important point, though, to emphasize is that there's not two of these kids alike. I mean, they can have similar features, but they're absolutely unique children and become unique adults. The common features are they typically can have, they must have, according to the diagnostic criteria, early speech and language delay. And that's sort of a hallmark feature, with the exception being Asperger's. It does not require early speech and language delay. Every other one does. And if they had early speech and language delay, the flag should go up for PDD, because that's just a hallmark feature.
Part of it was because he couldn't communicate with us, and we don't know what he was trying to tell us at the time. The other thing we learned is that their sensory system is very challenged. It's like those little neurons are constantly misfiring. They may be very verbal, but it doesn't mean that they're always communicating. And communication is so many different nuances. There's the nonverbal and the body movements and facial expressions. And even now, he's 19, he still has trouble reading facial expressions. Or when we're teasing, and he'll get very serious, he said, "Is that a joke? Do you mean that?" And when we're totally just joking around, and to us it's very obvious that we're joking, but to him it wasn't a joke, because he just didn't, he wasn't following.
Along with early speech and language delay, autism may be indicated by concentration problems, which may initially be diagnosed as attention deficit disorder. Perseveration. Autistic children are unable to stop an activity that they are involved in at that particular moment, and may need extra time and warnings to when the task will end. Transitional difficulties. Autistic children do not respond well to change in routine or stopping a task quickly. Again, allow time for this.
We take him on the long rides around the freeways to try to calm him down when he was upset, and driving
an entire loop
through 3580 through Metro Des Moines. And then as he got older, he knew what exits and what entrances to get off at, and an average 4 or 5 year old wouldn't even understand that.
We always had to be in the same lane, going in the same direction. And I remember the time we were going to my mom's, and one of the exit ramps was closed, so we had to take a different way. Well, it was a change. They don't cope well with change, and they can't communicate that. It's a frightening, painful experience for them. And his way of communicating to us was to have complete meltdown. The kicking, the screaming, complete rejection of what's going on in his environment at that time.
It ought to be one of the diagnostic criteria. It isn't, but it's very common that these children will say, "I can't stand the tags in my shirts," or the parents will say they've been cutting him out of his shirt for life, or socks that are too tight, or won't wear jeans, have to have sweatpants because they can't stand how it holds them. Loud noises or bright lights. Some don't like to be touched, which is probably relevant for law enforcement, because if if you knew that that person was in the autistic spectrum, and putting your hands on them could cause them to, as we say in the medical jargon, freak out, and cause problems.
Autistic children may misinterpret information by not understanding the true meaning of what you are saying. Be very clear with your questions and directions, and only ask one thing at a time.
Yeah, I've had troubles with some kids. I deal with it, and then when it doesn't work, I go to someone to talk to them about it. What bothered me was, well, the medicine. The medicine just really didn't get along with it for a while until I got used to it. Several of them are for focusing. One of them is at night to get me to sleep. I'm taking classes for adult living, and I can stay here until I'm 21 if I need to.
As police officers today, we have so much more information about mental health issues than we did 30 years ago. And there's just a greater field of knowledge. There's a lot more resources that are available to help families and to help children with mental health issues. And so as police officers, when we enter into a school or somebody's home and we're interacting with a child that's in crisis or that's out of control or they're in trouble, there's just a lot more information available to us to become aware of a potential mental health issue, and it makes it easier for us to interact and help that child and that child's family.
It's not about I'm being a bad parent. I didn't do drugs, didn't drink.
We really still think this is either bad behavior on the part of the child or bad parenting on the part of the parents to not manage the child very well. And so it's kind of a double whammy for families who are seeking help. They may be embarrassed about a mental illness to begin with because of the general stigma, but they also have a lot of concern that they're going to be blamed or shamed as though they are somehow responsible for what's happening to their child.
I did the best that I felt for them. And yeah, you get these stares, do this, shut that child up. And I tell them, if I could shut them up, I would. Do you think I want to sit here and listen at a child screaming for hours? No, I don't.
I mean, I've had multiple people say, don't you think sometimes you just have a bad kid? And I say, no. When a child is born, they are programmed to want to please the adults around them. That's the way children are.
There are some kids, and particularly for some disorders, for which I would say absolutely they can and they do recover. There are some disorders for kids, just as for adults, that really that cycle and are chronic.
For the first time last 2 weeks, Joey's been employed and going to start working and probably contribute to the working world, and he's pretty excited. So
he has the same goals as other people. He wants to be self-sufficient. He wants to be able to live on his own, and he wants to buy a condo. And he knows that driving isn't in the cards for him. So he's looking at other ways that he can navigate around in our world when everybody else drives, and learning to ride the bus and navigate that all on his own he's willing to accept the challenge, and we just want other people to give him the same chance and opportunities. And
just a little person working real hard.
He fell farther and farther behind. His shoes came untied, but he kept going. When the other participants crossed the finish line, Ronald was only about halfway around. I kept the camcorder on him. As he came around the last turn toward the finish, I caught in the corner of my eye some of his teammates in the infield. They'd started running with him and were calling to him, "Go, Ronald! Go, Ronald!" As Ronald came closer to the bleachers, other people began to take up the cry, "Go, Ronald!" And as he passed in front of the crowd, the cry swept across the stands. Parents of other kids from other schools had picked up his name and were yelling, "Go, Ronald!" Ronald smiled and ran.